When American troops entered the tunnels beneath Nordhausen in the spring of 1945, they heard a strange hum. Deep underground, something was still running. Officers descended deeper and froze. Before them stood a machine that shouldn't have existed. A metallic cylinder the height of a two-story building, surrounded by charred walls. Around it, dead animals, plants that had blackened right in their pots. And on the floor lay documents with a classification that translated simply the bell. This was only the beginning. The Third Reich lost the war in 1945, but technologically, it won a race that continues to this day. While the Allies fought with tanks, German engineers in secret bunkers were creating weapons that were decades ahead of their time. Wunderwaffe, wonder weapons. That's what they called it themselves. And the problem is that most of these technologies actually worked. And those they didn't finish became the foundation for everything we know today. Space rockets, jet aircraft, chemical weapons. It all started there in those bunkers. And the scariest part? We still don't know exactly what they created in the final months of the war. September 1944, London. People wake to strange silence. No sirens wailing, no bombers overhead. Then an explosion rings out. Powerful, sudden, without any warning. Ww2 had arrived, the world's first ballistic missile. It climbed to an altitude of 90 kilometers, higher than any aircraft could fly, and fell vertically downward at supersonic speed. A ton of explosives. No possibility of interception or warning sound. You're simply dead, and you never even understood why. You know who assembled them? Concentration camp prisoners in the underground shafts of Piedmont. They worked 16-hour shifts in freezing cold, many dying right at their workstations from exhaustion. And the engineers above them said, "We're 100 years ahead of humanity." And they weren't lying. After the war, both Americans and Soviets built their space programs on these blueprints. Wernher von Braun, chief designer of the V-2, launched America's first rocket into space 10 years later. The same man whose rockets killed civilians in London became a NASA hero. Think about that. But rockets were only the visible part. The real secrets went deeper. Literally. In hundreds of kilometers of tunnels beneath German cities, work was underway that even many Wehrmacht officers didn't know about. Project Bell, that same machine the Americans found. Officially, anti-gravity experiments. A massive cylinder inside, which liquid mercury mixed with radioactive elements rotated. When activated, metal objects around the device began to bend. The air glowed with a strange green light, and everything alive within a radius of several meters died instantly. What was it? A failed nuclear energy experiment? An attempt to create a new type of engine? Or maybe a weapon whose operating principle we still haven't figured out? Here's what's truly frightening. After the war, the Bell disappeared. Completely. Only charred laboratory walls remained, a few photographs, and SS officer testimonies during interrogations. Where did the device itself go? Did the Americans take it? Did the Germans destroy it before surrender? Or does it still stand somewhere in a sealed bunker that nobody knows about? German archives mention that 2 weeks before surrender, critically important equipment was removed from this laboratory. Where to? The documents show a dash. And now the most interesting part. Parallel to the Bell existed Project Neptune, underwater platforms for launching ballistic missiles. Imagine, 1944, German engineers are developing a concept that the US and USSR would only realize in the 60s. A submarine surfaces in the Atlantic, launches a missile at New York or Washington, and submerges. Impossible to detect, impossible to intercept the missile. One SS officer wrote in his diary a phrase that still sounds like a warning. If we'd had just 6 more months, the world would have seen a completely different war. Technically, everything was ready. They just ran out of time. But technology is only half the story. The other half is human experiments. And this is where the real hell begins. High in the Alps, in a laboratory with the codename Annenherb, SS doctors searched for a way to create a superhuman. Not metaphorically, literally. They measured how long a human could survive in ice water. They placed people in vacuum chambers, simulating an altitude of 20 kilometers, and watched how quickly eardrums ruptured and blood boiled. Everything was recorded as standard medical reports. Subject number 84. Time to loss of consciousness, 4 minutes, 18 seconds. Death occurred after 11 minutes. That's all. No names, no emotions. After the war, these doctors were hunted worldwide. Some are found in Argentina under new names. Others in the United States, where they continued their research, only now for the American military. Operation Paperclip. The U.S. officially brought over more than 1,600 German scientists and gave them complete amnesty. Among them were not only rocket scientists, but also those who conducted medical experiments. Their data on frostbite is still used in military medicine today. Think about it. Every time a military doctor looks at a hypothermia treatment protocol, he's seeing information obtained at the cost of someone's life in that alpine bunker. And then there was D9, a cocktail of morphine, cocaine, and caffeine in proportions calculated by SS chemists. A soldier under its influence could march for 3 days without sleep, without food, without rest. Fear was completely shut off, pain ignored, the body operated at maximum capacity, until the heart stopped. Usually this happened on the 4th day. Documentation on this drug was presented at the Nuremberg trials. The judges listened in complete silence. And you know what happened next? The formula was classified and handed over to American military chemists. Modern combat stimulants given to fighter pilots and special forces are based on precisely these developments. 1944, à Bunker Beniat, Berlin. On the table lie blueprints of a craft that looks like an illustration from a science fiction novel. Silbervogel, the Silver Bird, a suborbital bomber. It was supposed to launch with a rocket booster, climb to an altitude of 280 kilometers, exit the atmosphere, drop a bomb on any point on the planet, and return to base, skipping off dense layers of air like a stone on water. Distance from Berlin to New York, about an hour of flight. Impossible to intercept, too high and too fast. Engineer Eugen Sanger presented fully workable calculations. Technically, it was feasible even then, in 44. They just lacked the resources. The Americans found these blueprints after the war. Know what they did with them? Classified them for 40 years. And then the concept of the space shuttle emerged based on them. The idea of a reusable spacecraft that lands like an airplane. That's the direct legacy of Silbervogel. A German engineer who never saw his project in action laid the foundation for the American space program. But the most horrifying thing was located beneath Nuremberg. When the Allies entered there in the spring of 1945, they discovered kilometers of tunnels with dozens of reactors. These weren't nuclear, but chemical reactors for producing chemical warfare agents. They were manufacturing the fog of death on an industrial scale. Phosgene, sarin, and toluene. These gases were tested on living people, who in documents were impersonally called material. In one of the preserved reports, there's this blood-chilling entry, test number 73. Gas acts 12 seconds after inhalation. Complete loss of consciousness after 28 seconds. Body cools to room temperature after 48 seconds. Efficiency deemed optimal. That's it. No details about who this person was. Just numbers. The Germans tried to destroy most of the documents. But SS officers who understood what awaited them began to trade. Formulas in exchange for their lives. And the Americans bought them. After the war, these developments became the basis for chemical weapons development during the Cold War. Sarin, which was used in local conflicts around the world, was created in those very tunnels beneath Nuremberg. We still live with the consequences of what was developed there. And now, attention, the strangest part. In the mountains of Czechoslovakia, the Germans were building a system of huge radio antennas. The project was called Obersalzberg, officially for communication with submarines through the ionosphere. But in other classified documents, another word kept appearing, Gedankenübertrag, thought transmission. From 1943, Nazi leadership actively funded research in the field of telepathy, mass hypnosis, and remote influence on human consciousness. Sounds like nonsense? The documents are real. Signatures, dates, stamps, everything's in place. Moreover, there are eyewitness accounts describing strange experiments. People were placed in lead-shielded rooms. Incomprehensible equipment was turned on, and subjects began behaving erratically. What exactly were they doing there? We don't know, because before retreating, the Germans blew up all the laboratories and destroyed the equipment. Only fragments of documents and photographs of empty rooms with charred walls remain. Kurt Diebner, remember this name. a physicist who worked under Werner Heisenberg's direct supervision on the German atomic program. For a long time, historians believed Germany was far from creating a nuclear bomb. But in April 1945, the Americans found something in a cave beneath Hagerloch Mountain. A small, primitive, but fully functional nuclear reactor. A metal vessel with water cooling, graphite blocks, and uranium-235 residue. It worked. Perhaps only a few days, perhaps a few weeks. But the Germans created a working reactor. And that means they were one step away from the bomb. One step away from changing the outcome of the war. How many such reactors were there? 1, 3, 10? We don't know. Because at the end of the war, special SS teams were massively evacuating equipment and documents to the Alps. In the Berchtesgaden area, they found warehouses filled with boxes of microfilm. Thousands of pages of formulas, blueprints, experiment protocols. Some films are so poorly preserved that the text disintegrates when you try to read it. What was written there? What other secrets did the Germans manage to hide in the final weeks? And this sounds like a science fiction plot, but these are real documents. Project Sun Gun. German engineers developed a concept for a giant orbital mirror several kilometers in diameter. It was supposed to hang in space and focus sunlight on any point on Earth. Temperature at the focal point, several thousand degrees. Enough to instantly vaporize a city. Sounds insane, but the blueprints are real. Orbital calculações accurate. Even prototypes of reflective panels were created. The only thing missing was the technology to launch such a structure into space. But the idea itself was absolutely workable. And this was in 1944, when the world didn't yet know what an artificial satellite was. In Bavaria, the Germans launched aerostats with silver iodide, trying to cause artificial storms over Allied positions. On the Eastern Front, they tested aerosols for local temperature increase to neutralize Russian frosts. Weather control is a weapon. Each experiment was documented with the mark Geheime Reichsake, absolute state secret. How successful were these attempts? Unknown. But the fact remains, they tried to turn nature into a weapon of mass destruction. The Mittelbau-Dora factories, kilometers of underground tunnels where concentration camp prisoners worked in 3 shifts. They assembled Ww2 rockets, jet aircraft, unknown devices whose purpose wasn't explained to them. People there never saw the sun. They slept on bare bunks, ate thin gruel once a day, worked until complete exhaustion. Every 3rd person died, but production never stopped, because one of the orders stated, work continues at any cost. Our only goal, vengeance weapons. Wunderwaffe was supposed to change everything, and the Germans believed this until the very end. Spring 1945, American troops enter Thuringia. In one of the bunkers, they find an archive with blueprints of aircraft unlike anything known. Disc-shaped bodies, strange turbines, devices the creators called gravity engines, projects Honebu and Vril, documents signed by real engineers, with dates, test locations, technical specifications. Was this a real program? Or disinformation to distract Allied intelligence? Or an attempt to explain the failure of other projects through non-existent technologies? Nobody knows, because all the scientists who worked on these projects either died, disappeared, or refused to speak during interrogations. The blueprints are still stored in classified archives. Access to them is restricted. And here's the final blow. Operation Totensonnen, a project for combat application of radioactive materials. Almost no documents survived, most were destroyed. But there's one detail that's impossible to ignore. At the end of the war, in March 1945, on the territory of occupied Czechoslovakia, local residents repeatedly reported strange flashes. Bright light that for a second turned night into day. Then, a thunderous sound and a shockwave that broke trees within a radius of several kilometers. The descriptions are very similar to a low-yield nuclear explosion. The Allies investigated these reports after the war, but found no conclusive evidence. The official version, ammunition depots exploded. But there's a nuance. There are no depots in those locations. So what exploded in the Czech forests in the spring of '45? After the surrender, a real hunt began. The U.S. launched Operation Paperclip and secretly brought more than 1,600 German scientists, engineers, and doctors to America. They were given complete amnesty, new documents, and new life. Among them, Ww2 creator Wernher von Braun, who became the father of the American space program. The Soviet Union acted exactly the same way. German blueprints were divided between two superpowers, and the space race began, and the arms race, and the Cold War. All of this grew from those technologies born in the dungeons of the Third Reich. But questions remain. How many bunkers were never found? How many archives did the Germans manage to hide in the final days? Which technologies were so dangerous that the creators themselves destroyed them so that no one would ever know? In the German Alps, they still find sealed entrances to tunnels. Behind some of them, emptiness. Behind others, the unknown. And the most terrifying question of all, what if not all the equipment was evacuated? What if somewhere deep underground, machines still stand whose existence we don't even suspect? Third Reich archives are being declassified gradually, in small portions, decades later. Every year, new documents appear, and each time, historians find something that forces them to reconsider what we thought we knew. In photographs from laboratories, you can see rooms flooded with green light, people in gas masks at tables with incomprehensible equipment, metal cylinders with wires whose purpose is unclear. In the captions, dispassionate phrases. Test number 349 completed. No names, no evaluations, no explanations. Just a statement of fact. These secrets aren't about the brilliance of engineering thought. This is a story about a line that must not be crossed. Germany of the 40s proved one simple truth. Science without morality turns a laboratory into a crematorium. Knowledge without ethics turns a scientist into an executioner. And therefore the word secrets in the context of World War II isn't a mystery or secret knowledge. It's a warning about what can happen when humanity forgets what science exists for, and about the fact that some doors are better left unopened, because behind them might be something that will change the world forever, and not necessarily for the better.